All right. Hi, everyone. There were so many. My name is Dr. Cheryl Meyer. We're going to read Evelyn Underhill, Mysticism. And today I'm in my office so that we don't have any interruptions. If you've seen my other videos leading up to this one, it's like I never made YouTube videos before because so many things kept showing up. And so, I just wanted to eliminate all of those, and we don't have a dynamic background, but so what? All right, you can just like look at my books or something. So yeah, all right, we're gonna start. Mysticism. This is the development and nature of spiritual consciousness by Evelyn Underhill. It's from 1910, and there's a playlist. And all right, so let's start. Usually I have a sunset behind me, or I'm at the ocean, so you can watch something dynamic, or I have my dog or something, but I just wanted somewhere quiet this time. Look, we're only a minute in and I'm gonna start. All right. I'm gonna take this out. The extraordinary phenomenon known as double or disintegrated personality may perhaps give us a hint as to the mechanical nature of the change which contemplation affects. In this psychic malady, the total character of the patient is split up. A certain group of qualities are, okay, so I'm a psychologist, my day job, so this is my office, and I've been a psychologist for over 20 years. And anyway, so we're talking about mysticism and psychology. That's the chapter that we're on right now. Oh yeah, I forgot we're on page 69. I remember, because that's like the yin and the yang. So we're in chapter 3 right now. You can start here, or you can go back and start at the beginning of the playlist. But let me hold up, just so you know, if you want to take a screenshot and look at what's covered in this chapter. It's right here. All right. So, I'll keep reading I'll start a little bit before where we were. Just right now where I am. In this psychic malady, the total character of the patient is split up. A certain group of qualities are, as it were, abstracted from the surface consciousness and so closely associated as to form in themselves a complete character or personality. Necessarily pulls asunder from the character which the self usually shows to the world. I think she was talking about people with different personalities. But she's going to relate it to mysticism, so just hang on. Since it consists exclusively of those elements which are omitted from it. Thus, in the classical case of Mrs. Beauchamp, the investigator, Dr. Morton Prince called the 3 chief personalities from their ruling characteristics the saint, the woman, and the devil. And so this woman had these different personalities. And so she's going to bring it back to how the mystic has a different... can go into a different state of consciousness in a way and see the world a different. Oh, this is so great. Look, I'll show you what's in front of us, because I always trust that whatever we need for our videos will be right in front of us. Is like, I have this on my desk, of course. You know, one of my clients gave it to me a long time ago because they know I love C.S. Lewis, and C.S. Lewis was inspired by Evelyn Underhill, and they corresponded with each other. She told him his idea of God was not wild enough. And like 10 years later, he came up with Aslan. Right? Look at that. But in this other one I just showed you, it says, yes, said Queen Lucy, in our world too, a stable once had something inside that was bigger than our whole world. Right? And so, I heard someone teaching today about how when Christ resurrected, the people that were faithful, he revealed himself to them, and there were witnesses and other people that knew of the witnesses and stuff like that. So it wasn't just made up in their mind, but it's kind of like, if you have a mindset where you keep seeing negative, then you keep seeing negative. If you develop the spiritual capacity to slow down and be present, then you see more spiritual things all the time. Messages are always being conveyed. She talks about it like a telegram, down a wire. If you don't practice being present, then you're too busy to notice any of these. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. It's kind of like that. It's that concept, but she'll talk more. But I want to give you some practical understanding so you can understand. All right. So the saint, the woman, and the devil. The totality of character which composed the real Miss Beauchamp had split up into these mutually opposing types, each of which was excessive because withdrawn from the control of the rest. When voluntarily or involuntarily the personality which had possession of the field of consciousness was lulled to sleep, one of the others emerged. Hypnotism was one of the means which most easily effected this change. Now, in persons of mystical genius, the qualities which the stress of normal life tends to keep below the threshold of consciousness are of enormous strength. So when you're caught up in your senses, it's hard to notice these more quiet things, It's like Jesus was walking with the men on the road back to Emmaus, and they didn't notice it was Jesus for some reason until he broke the bread and they saw, or when Jesus said to the fishermen, his disciples, have you caught anything yet in the Sea of Galilee? And John said, I think it was John that said, that's Jesus, And then Peter just jumped in the water and swam to him, because he had betrayed him 3 times. So it's like they knew for sure it was him, but things don't always, in the spiritual world, they don't always appear as we think they're going to appear. Anyway, hopefully that will come out more in the book, so I don't have to keep explaining these things, because I trust that she will, But I've had it happen to me like thousands of times. I'm sure you have as well. So if I think of an example, if it comes up, it'll come up later. Well, one example I can say is, like, you can't see my flex underneath this, but it's like I lost all this weight. And it's like I kept trying for 20 years to lose this weight and it didn't go. And then finally, when I was like, forget it. I probably have some hormonal imbalance that I can't fix. I'm just going to love myself as I am. And I had tried to love myself as I was before, but I hadn't really done it until I was like, nope, I'm just stuck with this. And it's kind of like the word Buddha means awakened. When the Buddha gave up trying to be enlightened, he got enlightenment. He became awakened. He became the Buddha, which means awakened. Like we can all be awakened. We're meant to be awakened, And so it's like when I gave up trying, but it wasn't like I just ate whatever I wanted after that. It was just more like, a different solution appeared then. And I was like, I'm just going to do this workout, this weight thing workout where you use your own body weight for 50 minutes a day, every day. And even if I don't lose weight, I'm just going to be lean and strong. And I just knew it in my mind. And then it started happening. It calmed my body down. I wasn't stressed out or judging my worth based on it. And that's just how it shows up a different way. But you have to totally surrender the outcome. Not just pretend to surrender the outcome, but totally surrender it. And the divine love, God helps you do that anyway. Okay, now in persons of mystical genius, the qualities which the stress of normal life tends to keep below the threshold of consciousness are of enormous strength. In these natural explorers of eternity, the, quote, transcendental faculty, end quote, the, quote, eye of the soul, is not merely present in embryo, but is highly developed and is combined with great emotional and volitional power. The result of the segregation of such qualities below the threshold of consciousness is to remove from them the friction of those counterbalancing traits in the surface mind with which they might collide. They are, quote, in the hiddenness, as Jacob Boehme would say. There they developed unchecked until a point is reached at which their strength is such that they break their bounds and emerge into the conscious field, either temporarily dominating the subject as in ecstasy or permanently transmuting the old self as in the unitive life. The attainment of this point is accelerated by such processes as those of contemplation. So I just heard John Butler, who's very good at contemplating. He's great. If you want to watch him on YouTube, he'll watching just 3 of his videos will really help you understand what she's talking about. Because I just watched a video last night that was just so sweet. And he was saying, if you don't know what to say, and then it's ellipsis, and he talked about going to a party and feeling socially awkward, but just staying in deep presence. And then something will surface. And even if something doesn't, you let go of all outcome. And what struck me in that video, what I really loved, was he said that he used to have all these post-it notes. I have them all over my house that say, be present, all over your car, wherever, until you practice that discipline. And so when I told my brother, I was asking my older brother, I was like, didn't the Buddha just give up? He's like, no, he didn't just live a life of dissipation and give up everything. He had this 8-fold path where he was really being disciplined. He just gave up trying to do it his own way and surrendered it to the divine, to God. Like the first step in AA is came to believe a power greater than me could restore me to sanity, right? Okay, these processes, not themselves mystical, but merely the mechanical conditions of mystical experience, are classed by psychologists with the state of dream and reverie, and the conditions loosely called hypnotic. In them, the normal surface consciousness is deliberately or involuntarily lulled, and images or faculties from beyond the threshold are able to take its place. Okay? And so I'm so glad we're here. Look what I have as an example. And I need to grab more business cards to pass out anyway, right? Because I don't have any more in my car. But look at this. This is like the third drawing I ever drew. This is a Van Gogh called At Eternity's Gate, but this is my drawing of it. You can see, I have it on the wall over there. Oh, it's right behind me. If you can see it, it's that picture. But I have, my signature and everything because I read a book, just the first 3 chapters of the book, because I couldn't get further in it because it worked already. She said, how to draw using the right side of your brain. Turn the drawing that you're looking at. So I turned Van Gogh's drawing upside down and turn your sketchbook upside down. This was much bigger. I shrunk it for this, and then you don't know. I didn't know I was drawing fingers right there. I didn't know I was drawing a handkerchief, right by his ear. Because as soon as your logical brain says, I'm drawing a finger, then you draw your idea of a finger. It's like if I said, I'm losing weight, then I kept giving myself my ideas of how to lose weight. And your intuition or your inner knowing or connecting to divine, who knows everything, or the Holy Spirit, will give you a much better blueprint, much better answer. It's just like, did I go into a hypnotic state? No, but I turned off my logical mind so it would stop interfering. Because before that, if you see in my notes here with my clients, I'm not going to show you those, I draw, if I draw a boot, you'll see, my picture of a boot is still, I have boots on. Like this. Here, I just drew it. Like that. I cannot draw unless I turn my logical brain off. And so that's the same with this, is you're learning how to stop relying on your outer senses, which give you so much in this world. So you're so rewarded and they're recompensed, and it's like a Pavlov's dogs or something. You're rewarded for using your outer senses, and so it feels crazy to slow them down. But it's the only way you can develop this consciousness. And if you don't develop this consciousness, then I mean, you ought to in prayer anyway, on some level, because all of us ought to pray. You know, it says pray without ceasing. But if you don't do it to the level of the mystics because you're here for a certain other reason in this lifetime, you might be here to be doing active things, you know, and not be a mystic or a contemplative. And so then it's important that you find people like Teresa of Avila or St. John of the Cross, or people that you can trust, like Rumi or whatever, who have done this, and just examine what they've said and be present with it, and don't just write it off as crazy or whatever. They're pioneers. We're pioneers in this field. Okay, this is where we were then. Of course, these images or faculties may or may not be more valuable than those already present in the surface consciousness. In the ordinary subject, often enough, they are but the odds and ends for which the superficial mind has found no use. In the mystic, they are of a very different order, and this fact justifies the means which he instinctively employs he or she to secure their emergence. We're securing the emerging of these faculties, that we have the capacity. It's like they say we have junk DNA. Well, maybe it's not junk DNA. Maybe if we were all developed this mystic side of ourselves, all of that could be lit up in us, and it'd be used, and we'd know the use of them, right? Indian mysticism founds its external system almost wholly on asceticism, like I was talking about the Buddha taking the Eightfold Path, right? That my brother was describing to me, the path of right thinking, right acting, right wisdom, right job, you know, right occupation, right way of being in the family, or way of eating, or I don't remember the whole eightfold way right off hand right now, but that's asceticism. But asceticism, A is asceticism, the domination of the senses, like not letting them dominate, you know. And B, the deliberate practice of self-hypnotization, either by fixing the eyes on a near object or by the rhythmic repetition of the mantra or sacred word. By these complementary forms of discipline, the pull of the phenomenal world is diminished and the mind is placed at the disposal of the subconscious powers. And she describes subconscious as different than how psychologists describe just subconscious being one aspect. Dancing, music. Oh, like Rumi. I just mentioned Rumi. I didn't know she was going to say that. The Sufi poets, and the Sufi was a mystic form of Muslim religion. They would do these twirling dances. I got to see one when I was in Turkey, and they were showing how in the dance they're divesting themselves. Oh, Islam. It's a mystic form of Islam, just like there's mystic forms of Judaism and mystic forms of Christianity. But anyway, I won't get into all of that. But I could see the similarities in the dance. They were doing a dance showing letting go of your outer self and spinning to let it spin off pretty much, and your real self comes, but you're also actively in your body, and so you're moving your body so that you're grounded. Anyway, dancing, music, and other exaggerations of natural rhythm have been pressed into the same service by the Greek initiates of Dionysus, by the Gnostics, by innumerable other mystic cults, you know, by the Native Americans too. She didn't say that, but I'm part Native American anyway. That these proceedings do affect a remarkable change in the human consciousness is proved by experience, though how and why they do it is as yet little understood. Such artificial and deliberate production of ecstasy is against the whole instinct of the Christian contemplatives. But here and there amongst them also we find instances in which ecstatic trance or lucidity, the liberation of the, quote, transcendental sense, was inadvertently produced by purely physical means, like I know the Orthodox do. they do this extreme like kneeling and, kneeling and standing and kneeling and standing, obedience of a kind, or like 5-hour services. Or I went to a monastery and we would get up 3 a.m. and pray until 5 or something like that. And when I went to the Dr. Joe Dispenza advanced training, he said that between like 4 a.m. and 6 or something are your most lucid states, or your subconscious is most. Anyway, I don't get into it because I'm not encouraging any occult anything, but she'll go into this. Such artificial and deliberate production of ecstasy is against the whole instinct of the Christian contemplatives. I just read in Teresa of Avila's The Interior Castle. I have it with me because I was going to read it if I had time in between clients. She says, you don't need any kind of Kabbalistic or occult way of doing something in order to get to this. So don't think that you do, because I've already gone down those roads and I'm encouraging you not to. But, anyway, this is your life, so you get to find things out yourself. But thus, Jacob Boehme, Boehme, the Teutonic theosopher, having one day, as he sat in his room, gazed fixedly upon a burnished pewter dish, which reflected the sunshine with great brilliance, fell into an inward ecstasy, and it seemed to him as if he could look into the principles and deepest foundations of things. That's in a book called Martinson. Now, people have experiences like this all the time. Samadhi. I experience this just looking at the sunset sometimes, or being quiet, or roller skating, or meditating. I was listening to a Bob Marley song and I just felt this like oneness with everything. Or sometimes something extreme can happen, like someone's, an emergency happens, you're in a car accident, and you just get a download, you get a real, an insight about how everything's connected, in those poignant moments. Anyway, the contemplation of running water had the same effect on St. Ignatius of Loyola. Sitting on the bank of a river one day and facing the stream, which was running deep, quote, the eyes of his mind were opened, not so as to see any kind of vision, but so as to understand and comprehend spiritual things. And this with such clearness that for him all these things were made new. She said that's in the Testament 3, but I know I have the exercises of St. Ignatius. I think it's in there as well on my phone. But anyway, this method of attaining to mental lucidity by a narrowing and simplification of the conscious field finds an apt parallel in the practice of Immanuel Kant, who, quote, found that he could better engage in philosophical thought while gazing steadily at a neighboring church steeple. It need hardly be said that rationalistic writers, ignoring the parallels offered by the artistic and philosophic temperaments, have seized eagerly upon the evidence afforded by such instances of apparent monoideism and self-hypnotization in the lives of the mystics, and by the physical disturbances which accompany these ecstatic trance, and sought by its application to attribute all the abnormal perceptions of contemplative genius to hysteria or other disease. They'll say it's other disease, but it's like, if you've had this experience, that you really have seen the world from a different perspective. Now, I know people can have other kinds of experiences that are traumatic, and while you'll still understand the world a different way. Anyway, I'll just keep going. They have not hesitated to call St. Paul an epileptic, for getting blind on the road, on the road to Damascus. St. Teresa, from this book, right? The, quote, patron saint of hysterics, and have found room for most of their spiritual kindred in various departments of the pathological museum. They have been helped in this grateful task by the acknowledged fact that the great contemplatives though almost always persons of robust intelligence and marked practical or intellectual ability. Plantius, St. Bernard, the two SS St. Catherines, St. Teresa, St. John of the Cross, and the Sufi poets Jami and Jalalu Din are cases in point, and Rumi, I would say, RUMI, but have often suffered from bad physical health. He didn't, but more, their mystical activities have generally reacted upon their bodies in a definite and special way, producing in several cases a particular kind of illness and of physical disability accompanied by pains and functional disturbances for which no organic cause could be discovered unless that cause were the immense strain which exalted spirit puts upon a body which is adapted to a very different form of life. Like Teilhard de Chardin says, we are spiritual beings having a physical experience. We're not physical beings having a spiritual experience, but we're in these physical bodies, and sometimes it can't hold all of the, if you want to call it chi, or the power, the breath of life that God has given to us. It is certain that the abnormal and highly sensitized type of mind, which we call mystical, does frequently, but not always, produce or accompany strange and inexplicable modifications of the physical organism with which it is linked. The supernatural is not here in question, except insofar as we are inclined to give that name to natural phenomena, which we do not understand. Such instances of psychophysical parallelism as the stigmatization of saints, and indeed of other suggestible subjects hardly to be ranked as saints, will occur to anyone. So yes, just because you can hypnotize other people, I've seen that done in a room, doesn't mean they're hypnotized into a state of not knowing, Anyway, I here offer to the reader another less discussed and more extraordinary example of the modifying influence of the spirit on the supposed, quote, laws of bodily life. We know as a historical fact, unusually well attested by contemporary evidence, and quite outside the sphere of hagiographic romance, that both St. Catherine of Siena and her namesake, St. Catherine of Genoa, active women as well as ecstatics, the first a philanthropist, reformer, and politician, and second an original theologian, and for many years the highly efficient matron of a large hospital, lived in the first case for years, and the second for constantly repeated periods of many weeks, without other food than the consecrated host, which they received at Holy Communion. They did this not by way of difficult obedience to a pious vow, but because they could not live in any other way. Whilst fasting, they were well active, capable of dealing with the innumerable responsibilities which filled their lives. But the attempt to eat, even for a few mouthfuls, and this attempt was constantly repeated, for, like all true saints, they detested eccentricity. Gosh. At once, when they tried to eat, made them ill and had to be abandoned as useless. And she says she has all of the references down below where these are. In spite of the researchers of Murisier, Murisier, Jeanette, Ribot, and other psychologists and their persevering attempts to find a pathological explanation which will fit all mystic facts, this and other marked physical peculiarities which accompany the mystical temperament belong as yet to the unsolved problems of humanity. They couldn't figure it out. They need to be removed both from the sphere of marvel and from that of disease, into which enthusiastic friends and foes force them by turn to the sphere of pure psychology, and there studied dispassionately with the attention which we so willingly bestow on the less interesting eccentricities of degeneracy and vice. See, we'll study degeneracy and vice and understand those, but it's important to be objective about these things as well. Their existence, I just said that on the side, their existence no more discredits the sanity of mysticism or the validity of its results than the unstable nervous condition usually noticed in artists who share to some extent the mystic's apprehension of the real. Don't I know? Okay. To some extent, the mystic's apprehension of the real discredits art. It doesn't discredit artists or art. In such cases as Kant and Beethoven, says von Hugel justly, a classifier of humanity, according to its psychophysical phenomena alone, would put these great discoverers and creators without hesitation amongst hopeless and useless hypochondriacs, right? In the case of the mystics, the disease of hysteria, with its astounding variety of mental symptoms, its strange power of disintegration, rearranging and enhancing the elements of consciousness, its tendencies to automation and ecstasy, has been most often invoked to provide an explanation of the observed phenomena. This is as if one sought the source of the genius of Taglioni in the symptoms of St. Vitus's dance. Both the art and the disease have to do with bodily movements, so both mysticism and hysteria have to do with the domination of consciousness by one fixed and intense idea or intuition which rules the life and is able to produce amazing physical and psychical results. In the hysteric patient, this idea is often trivial or morbid, but has become, thanks to the self's unstable mental condition, an obsession, right? In the mystic, the dominant idea is a great one, so great, in fact, that when it is received in its completeness by the human consciousness, almost of necessity, it ousts all else. And that's actually the first commandment, is thou shalt have no other God before me. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. If we actually did that for like 5 minutes a day, maybe we would start seeing these things, and I'm not telling you how to do that. As a psychologist, I'm not, okay? So I'm just saying, like, we're discounting all these people. And anyway, it's nothing less, and I'm not saying go into any kind of hysteric states at all. It is nothing less than the idea or perception of the transcendent reality and presence of God. Hence, the monoideism of the mystic is rational, whilst that of the hysteric patient is invariably irrational. They have an irrational fear and obsession with washing their hands and thinking they're going to take care of their problems and the world's problems if they keep washing their hands, and they get an immediate relief from washing their hands, and then so they keep going back to that. Now, people that are religious but aren't necessarily, these mystics can keep kneeling and praying and trying to absolve their own guilt. But these people, like St. Catherine and St. Teresa of Avila, you can read these books. And St. John of the Cross, is so profound, his Ascent to Mount Carmel book. And even Mathilde de Magberg, who Evelyn Underhill, either she translated or she wrote the foreword and edited this book that I have of hers. These people are definitely not irrational. But if you read Ecclesiastes or you read the Song of Solomon, you kind of get a taste of someone in a mystical type of state. It's poetry, in a way. But they're not irrational. They're not running after, a white stag, like in the Narnia book. But there was a white stag. Anyway, on the whole then, whilst psychophysical relations remain so little understood, it would seem more prudent and certainly more scientific to withhold our judgment on the meaning of the psychophysical phenomena which accompany the mystic life. Instead of basing destructive criticism on facts which are avowedly mysterious and at least capable of more than one interpretation, to deduce the nature of a compound from the character of its byproducts is notoriously unsafe, right? I'll just leave that sentence as it is. To deduce the nature of a compound from the character of its byproducts is notoriously unsafe. Like if you have a some kid drinking 10 sodas and watching TV and having a horrible byproduct, from that. It's like if he or she had one Coca-Cola, one soda, and they were watching a documentary on that same TV, they might have a completely different result, Anyway, our bodies are animal things made for animal activities. When a spirit of unusual ardor insists on using its nerve cells for other activities, they kick against the pricks. That's a saying. In the book of Acts, when Paul is over on Damascus Road, he says, why do you kick against the pricks? It's like, I had to look it up before. It's like the oxen would have, like iron thorns or something on its back, hind legs, that if it goes off the track, it would kick against what was just keeping them on track, so that they could get the job done faster or whatever. God will give us consolations and desolations and experiences so our faith can grow, not because he's a masochist. God, he or she, God's beyond gender. Anyway, when a spirit of unusual ardor insists on using its nerve cells for other activities, they kick against the pricks and inflict, as the mystics themselves acknowledge, the penalty of mystical ill health. Believe me, children, says Tauler, Tauler, one who would know much about these high matters would often have to keep his bed, for his bodily frame could not support it. I cause the extreme pain of body, says the voice of love. Oh, to Mechthild of Magdeburg, who I was just mentioning her. Mechthild. I don't know how to say that. Mechthild of Magdeburg. She says, I cause the extreme pain of body, says the voice of love, which is divine love, which is God, to this woman, Matilda of Magdeburg. If I gave myself to thee as often as thou wouldst have me, I should deprive myself of the sweet shelter I have of thee in this world, for 1,000 bodies could not protect a loving soul from her desire. Therefore, the higher the love, the greater the pain. And so she's saying, like, you have this desire and ask for God, please show me more of yourself. But love was saying back to her, and she translated it for us, that I have to protect you. You're in this world and in this physical body. I can't show you all of the godness. It's just like Moses had to see the back of God. It's like they said you couldn't see the face of God and live. It's kind of like that idea. On the other hand, the exalted personality of the mystic, his or her self-discipline, his heroic acceptance of labor and suffering, and his inflexible will raises to a higher term that normal power of mind over body, which all possess. Just like an Olympic athlete has learned how to do this in a way that we're like astounded, or like I used to do gymnastics, but like a gymnast in the Olympics can do like a triple twist and a back flip, and we can barely like stand on the ground and do a one full twist, but they're very disciplined and they practice it over and over again and gone, into a foam pit. They run and jump on like a springboard and do it into a foam pit over and over again until they can do it on the ground, but it looks impossible to us. That's why it's so amazing, right? But it's possible. Anyway, also, the contemplative state, like the hypnotic state in a healthy person, seems to enhance life by throwing open deeper levels of personality. The self then drinks at a fountain which is fed by the universal life, the quote, life of the spirit, to use the language of Euclid's philosophy. True ecstasy is notoriously life-enhancing. In it, a bracing contact with reality seems to take place, and as a result, the subject is himself more real. Often, says St. Teresa, even the sick comes forth from ecstasy healthy and with new strength. Even the sick comes forth from ecstasy healthy and with new strength, for something great is then given to the souls. contact has been set up with levels of being which the daily routine of existence leaves untouched. Hence, the extraordinary powers of endurance and independence of external conditions which the great ecstatics so often display. If we see in the mystic, as some have done, the sporadic beginning of a power, a higher consciousness toward which the race slowly tends, then it seems likely enough that where it appears, nerves and organs should suffer under a stress to which they have not yet become adapted. And that, I was just going to show you the scale of higher consciousness if I have it in my bag. I have it in lots of my videos, but David Hawkins has it. If you look up David Hawkins' scale of consciousness. Anyway, guilt and shame are at the bottom, and love and joy and peace are at the top. And they have ways to measure it now, measure your state of consciousness. Anyway, and it seems likely enough that where it appears nerves and organs should suffer under stress to which they have not yet become adapted, and that a spirit more highly organized than its bodily home should be able to impose strange conditions on the flesh. When man first stood upright, a body long accustomed to go on all fours, legs which had adjusted themselves to bearing but half his weight, must have rebelled against this unnatural proceeding. Well, I don't necessarily know about this, but we can talk about crawling, and then when you first walk, that's toddlers are like that. I remember Saturday Night Live skit, where someone's acting like a toddler and they're going all over the place. Must have rebelled against this unnatural proceeding, inflicting upon its author much pain and discomfort, if not absolute illness. It is at least permissible to look upon the strange, quote, psychophysical state, quote, unquote, state common among the mystics as just such a rebellion on the part of a normal nervous and vascular system against the exigencies of a way of life to which it has not yet adjusted itself. In spite of such rebellion and of the tortures to which it has subjected them, the mystics, oddly enough, are a long-lived race, an awkward fact for critics of the physiological school. To take only a few instances from amongst marked ecstasies, St. Hildegard's lived to be 81, Matilde of Magdeburg to 87, Ruysbrook's to 88, Suso to 70, St. Catherine of Genoa and St. Peter of Alcantara to 63. That was a long time in those days. My great-grandmother lived to her 90s, somewhere in her 90s, I think, and died with like a Bible in her arms, She just fell asleep with it in her arms. Madame Guyon to 69, Guyon, right? It seems as though that enhanced life, which is the reward of mystical surrender, enabled them to triumph over their bodily disabilities and to live and do the work demanded of them under conditions which would have incapacitated ordinary men or women, She's just saying mankind. Such triumphs, which take heroic rank in the history of the human mind, have been accomplished as a rule in the same way. Like all intuitive persons, all possessors of genius, all potential artists, with whom, in fact, they are closely related, the mystics have, in psychological language, quote, thresholds of exceptional mobility. That is to say, a very slight effort, a very slight departure from normal conditions will permit their latent or subliminal powers to emerge and occupy the mental field. A, quote, mobile threshold may make a man a genius, a lunatic, or a saint. All depends upon the character of the emerging powers. In the great mystic, these powers, these mighty tracts of personality lying below the level of normal consciousness, are of unusual richness and cannot be accounted for in terms of pathology. If it be true, says Delacroix, that the great mystics have not wholly escaped those nervous blemishes which mark nearly all exceptional organizations, there is in them a vital and creative power, a constructive logic, an extended scale of realization, in a word, a genius, which is, in truth, their essential quality. The great mystics, creators, and inventors who have found a new form of life and have justified it, join upon the highest summits of the human spirit. the great simplifiers of the world. I love that. I wanted to do a video. I have it in my car. I have this. I just kept feeling like I ought to do Arthur O'Shaughnessy's ode, the ode. You know, we are the music makers and we are the dreamers of dreams, the lone sea breakers, you know, and the movers and the shakers of the world, it seems. I could cry. It's so beautiful. It just describes what goes on in the mystic and in ourselves. I'm looking at this picture right there, these couple just holding hands and serene, you know, just like after Aslan rose in the Narnia book, in this serenity, you know, of dancing. Lucy and Susan are dancing and he's making flowers appear everywhere. Anyway, in truth, their essential quality, the great mystics, creators, and inventors who have found a new form of life and have justified it, join upon the highest summits of the human spirit, the great simplifiers of the world. The truth, then, that was a quote from Delacroix, Studies sur la mysticism. I think that's in French. Études sur. Anyway, the truth then, so far as we know it at present, seems to be that those powers which are in contact with the transcendental order and which constitute at the lowest estimate half the self are dormant in ordinary men, whose time and interest are wholly occupied in responding to the stimuli of the world of sense, you know, like emails and stuff now, like they didn't have then. With those latent powers sleeps the landscape which they alone can apprehend. In mystics, none of the self is always dormant. None of the self, you know, it's like they call it junk DNA. It's not. It's like that, but you are a soul. And if you're not living in your soul, you're just living in your physical body and caught up in the senses. Anyway, they have roused the dweller in the innermost from its slumbers, and round it have unified their life. Heart, reason, will are there in full action, drawing their energy not from the shadow show of sense, but from the deeps of true being, where a lamp is lit and a consciousness awake, of which the sleepy crowd remains oblivious. He who says the mystic is but half a man states the exact opposite of the truth. Only the mystic can be called a whole man or whole woman, you know, since in others half the powers of the self always sleep. This wholeness of experience is much insisted on by the mystics. Thus the divine voice says to St. Catherine of Siena, I have also shown thee the bridge and the three general steps placed there for three powers of the soul. And I have told thee how no one can attain to the life of grace unless he has mounted all three steps, that is, gathered together all three powers of the soul in my name. I hope she describes these, because I can't remember. I read it in St. Catherine of Siena, but maybe she's talking about, you know, they've unified their heart, reason, and will. You know, you're living from your soul. This noetic fire burns away this other stuff. Anyway, in those abnormal types of personality to which we give the name of genius, we seem to detect a hint of the relations which may exist between these deep levels of being and the crust of consciousness. Let me see which books. The one of St. Catherine is in Dialogo, I think, yeah. Dialogo. Caption. I can't add this up right now. Is that 50? XXXVI. 50, 60, 70, 86. Maybe chapter 86? Or caption 86? I'm not sure. It just says cap, period. In the poet, the musician, the great mathematician or inventor, mighty powers lying below the threshold, hardly controllable by their owner's conscious will, clearly take a major part in the business of perception and conception, like the conceiving of their art or their music, their poetry. Oh, good. I think we can finish this chapter. In all creative acts, the larger share of the work is done subconsciously. Read my quote that I always quote. It's on my Twitter on Pavel Florensky. So amazing on where the artist, just type in Pavel artist and Dr. Cheryl M., and you'll find it. You'll find the quote. Its emergence is, in a sense, automatic. This is equally true of mystics, artists, philosophers, discoverers, and rulers of men. You know, like kings will often have this kind of, you know, they'll get visions because they have to rule so many. God will give them the tools they need because he cares about the people that are under the kings or the queens, you know. The great religion, invention, work of art always owes its inception to some sudden uprush of intuitions or ideas for which the superficial self cannot account. You know, like the Beatles, when John Lennon's son came home and he said, "What is that he drew?" And he's like, "It's Lucy in the sky with diamonds," you know, and he came up with that song. And sometimes he woke up with the song already in his mind, a different one. Its execution to powers so far beyond the control of that self that they seem, as their owner sometimes says, to quote, come from beyond. This is inspiration, like inspiration, spirit. It's like in breathing, like the Holy Spirit. It's called breath. It's like the breath of the Holy Spirit. Or they'd say muse. Music is touched by a muse, you know, come from God, from the beyond, from anyway. This inspiration, the opening of the sluices so that those waters of truth in which all life is bathed may rise to the level of consciousness. The great teacher, poet, artist, inventor never aims deliberately at his effects. He obtains them, he knows not how, perhaps from a contact of which he is unconscious with that creative plane of being which the Sufis call the constructive spirit and the Kabbalists yesod, you know, anyway, and which both postulates as lying next behind the world of sense. It's one, you know, a veil beyond that. Sometimes, said the great Alexandrian Jew, Philo, Jewish man, you know, Philo, quote, "When I have come to my work empty, I have suddenly become full, ideas being in invisible manner showered upon me and implanted in me from on high, so that through the influence of divine inspiration, I have become greatly excited and have known neither the place in which I was, nor those who were present, nor myself, nor what I was saying, nor what I was writing. For then I have been conscious of a richness of interpretation and enjoyment of light, a most penetrating insight, a most manifest energy, and all that was to be done, having such an effect on my mind as the clearest ocular demonstration would have on the eyes." You know, it's like if you put on the best glasses and you were all blurry and you could see everything very clearly, you're not going to, someone can't tell you you made that up. You actually are seeing clearly, and you know you have a knowing you are. Like, I've made over 600 videos on YouTube now. You could watch. At least 300 of them are from this, you know. Sometimes I'm in my psychology mind and I have it outlined and stuff. But I would say the majority are inspired, you know. Or they come to me inspired and I write down the idea and I'm like, what was I saying? What was that inspiration? And then I enter back in and I teach from that inspiration. Anyway, this is true, a true creative ecstasy that he was describing. You know, Philo was describing, Philo. Strictly parallel to the state in which the mystic performs his mighty works, his or her. You know, she's just using his in general. To let oneself go, be quiet, receptive in the condition under which such contact with the cosmic life may be obtained. I have noticed that when one paints, one should think of nothing. Everything then comes better, says the young Raphael to Leonardo da Vinci. Wow. I'll have a quote. I have a quote from Van Gogh, because I love Van Gogh too. He says, just slap anything on that blank canvas. He's like, nothing is worse than that blank canvas staring back at you, saying you can't, to the artist, but you can. I have it memorized. I sent it to one of my friends who's an artist his paintings are, that's the edge of his painting right there. Charlie Mackesy, he's really famous now, but I faxed that to him over 20 years ago when we were hanging out as friends. He's in England, so. So this is what Raphael says to Leonardo da Vinci. I have noticed that when one paints, one should think of nothing. Everything then comes better, says the young Raphael to Leonardo da Vinci. The superficial self must here acknowledge its own insufficiency. must become the humble servant of a more profound and vital consciousness, like what happened finally with my weight loss after 20 years of trying, you know. The mystics are of the same opinion. I tried, says Madame Guyon, Guyon, speaking of her early failures in contemplation, quote, to obtain by effort that which I could only obtain by ceasing all effort. Quote, the best and noblest way in which thou mayest come into this life, says Meister Eckhart, right, is by keeping silence and letting God work and speak. Where all the powers are withdrawn from their work and images, there is this word spoken, ellipsis, the more thou canst draw in all thy powers and forget the creature, the nearer art thou to this, and the more receptive. That's from Mystische Schriften. I don't know, it's in German, page 18. If anyone wants to translate anything I'm saying here, if you know it, the word is Schriften. And anyway, and right by it, Meister Eckhart, and 55 minutes in. Thus Boehm says to the neophyte, when both the intellect and will are quiet and passive to the expressions of the eternal word and spirit, and when thy soul is winged up above that which is temporal, the outward senses and the imagination being locked up by holy abstraction, then the eternal hearing, seeing, and speaking will be revealed in thee. Blessed art thou, therefore, if thou canst stand still from self-thinking and self-willing, and canst stop the wheel of thy imagination and senses. Then the conscious mind being passive, the more divine mind below the threshold, organ of our free creative life, can emerge and present its reports. In these words of an older mystic, quote, the soul, leaving all things and forgetting herself, is immersed in the ocean of divine splendor and illuminated by the sublime abyss of the unfathomable wisdom. And that sounds so familiar. That's for... and Dionysius the Areopagite. De Divinis Nonamibus. It's Latin. Anyway, but it sounds familiar. Maybe someone else quoted it. The passivity of contemplation, then, is a necessary preliminary of spiritual energy, an essential clearing of the ground. It withdraws the tide of consciousness from the shores of sense, stops the wheel of imagination. The soul, says Eckhart, Meister Eckhart again, is created in a place between time and eternity. With its highest powers, it touches eternity. With its lower, time. End quote. These, the worlds of being and becoming, are the two stages of reality which meet in the spirit of men. By cutting us off from the temporal plane, the lower kind of reality, contemplation gives the eternal plane and the powers which can communicate with that plane their chance. In the born mystic, these powers are great and lie very near the normal threshold of consciousness. He has a genius for transcendental, or as he would say, divine discovery, in exactly the same way as his cousins, the born musician and poet, have a genius for musical or poetic discovery. Now, I know of a mystic that said we have past lives, and that early Christians believed that, but I don't want to cause any disparity here, so it doesn't have to be true. But that one was saying that, you know, you're not necessarily born a musician. Maybe even if we had the chance to practice these things in heaven before we were given a body, like that they do come from diligence and discipline of some kind. Or maybe it's in our DNA because other people have worked on it. You know, I know other mystics that say we don't have past lives. So anyway, but that it doesn't just come magically like some, but God does give gifts as God wants to, as divine. Anyway, in all three cases, the emergence of these higher powers is mysterious. There, I just said. And not least to those who experience it. Psychology on the one hand, theology on the other, may offer us diagrams and theories of this proceeding, of the strange oscillations of the developing consciousness, the fitful visitations of a lucidity and creative power over which the self has little or no control, the raptures and griefs of a vision by turns granted and withdrawn, But the secret of genius still eludes us, as the secret of life eludes the biologist, where it actually came from, The utmost we can say of such persons is that reality presents itself to them under abnormal conditions and in abnormal terms, and that subject to these conditions and in these terms they are bound to deal with it. Thanks to their peculiar mental makeup, one aspect of the universe is for them focused so sharply that in comparison with it, all other images are blurred, vague, and unreal. Hence, the sacrifice which men of genius, mystics, artists, inventors make of their whole lives is to this one object, this one vision of truth, is not self-denial, but rather self-fulfillment. I'm going to go a little bit over an hour. Last time I had to leave because of the coyotes and my little dog. So the last video was 10 minutes less. This one might be 10 minutes more because there's only 4 more pages in this chapter, and it'd be nice to finish the chapter if we can. They gather themselves up from the unreal in order to concentrate on the real. The whole personality then absorbs or enters into communion with the certain rhythms or harmonies existent in the universe, which the receiving apparatus of other selves cannot take up. Here in the finger of God, a flash of the will that can, exclaims Abt Vogler as the sounds grow under his hands. The numbers came, says the poet. He knows not how, certainly not by deliberate intellectation, by pushing on your intellect. So it is with the mystic. Madame Guyon states in her autobiography that when she was composing her works, she would experience a sudden and irresistible inclination to take up her pen, though feeling wholly incapable of literary composition and not even knowing the subject on which she would be impelled to write. If she resisted this impulse, it was at the cost of the most intense discomfort. That's actually how I started reading tonight. I wanted to go home and get dinner, and I was like, it's going to be static. It's raining outside, so I couldn't go to the beach. But I just was like, I'm going to sit down and see what happens. And look, we've been reading an hour, We've been, me and the soul within me and the mystery of the divine communion of all the saints, I say that a lot in my videos, is we are born out of God, and it looks like we're all separate, but when you look like this, it's nope, we're all one, we're still, the Native Americans say we're in the mind womb of God, in God's dream. Anyway, if she resisted this impulse, it was at the cost of most intense discomfort. She would then begin to write with extraordinary swiftness, words, elaborate arguments, and appropriate quotations coming to her without reflection, like that happens to me here. Before we mention the person, these quotes come to me, right? And so quickly that one of her longest books was written in 1.5 days. Wow. In writing, I saw that I was writing, and here's a quote. In writing, I saw that I was writing of things which I had never seen, and during the time of this manifestation, I was given light to perceive that I had in me treasures of knowledge and understanding which I did not know that I possessed. Similar statements are made of Saint Teresa, who declared that in writing her books, she was powerless to set down anything but that which her master put into her mind. Her master is the Lord Jesus Christ. So Blake said of Milton and Jerusalem, I have written the poems from immediate dictation, 12 or sometimes 20 or 30 lines at a time, without premeditation, and even against my will. The time it has taken in writing was thus rendered non-existent, and an immense poem exists, which seems to be the labor of a long life, all produced without labor or study. Milton, right. So Blake said of his poem, Milton and Jerusalem. Wow. William Blake, Letters of Sir William Blake. That's April 25th, 1803. These are, of course, extreme forms of that strange power of automatic composition in which words and characters arrive and arrange themselves in defiance of their author's will, of which most poets and novelists possess a trace. Such composition is related to the automatic writing of mediums. It's related to that of mediums, right? But it's not this. And other sensitives in which the often disorderly and incoherent subliminal mind seizes upon this channel of expression. This is not the same. And it's important to know the difference. I can't wait for her to describe more and explain to us more, because I don't recommend any of opening those doors. The subliminal mind of the great mystic, however, is not disorderly. It is richly endowed and keenly observant, a treasure house, not a lumber room, and becomes, in the course of its education, a highly disciplined and skilled instrument of knowledge. When, therefore, its contents emerge and are presented to the normal consciousness in the form of lucidity, quote, auditions, visions, automatic writing, or any other translations of the supersensual into the terms of sensual perception, they cannot be discredited because the worthless subconscious field of feebler nature sometimes manifests itself in the same way. Idiots are often voluble, but many orators are sane. Like idiots can say things, when they're high or something, basically, but many orators are sane. Now to sum up, what are the chief characteristics which we have found in this sketch map of the mental life of man? 1. We have divided that life, arbitrarily enough, along the fluctuating line which psychologists call the, quote, threshold of his consciousness, into the surface life and the subconscious deeps. 2, in the surface life, though we recognize its essential wholeness, we distinguish 3 outstanding and ever-present aspects, the Trinity in unity of feeling, thought, and will. Amongst these, we were obliged to give the primacy to feeling as the power which set the machinery of thought and will to work. Like sense, feeling. I talk about that in the other videos where I read 2 videos back from this one. I think it's 2 videos back. We have seen that the expression of this life takes the 2 complementary forms of caunation, or outgoing action, and cognition, or indwelling knowledge. And that the first, which is dynamic in type, is largely dependent on the will stimulated by the emotions, whilst the second, which is passive in type, is the business of the intellect. So cognition is more the business of the intellect. The answer to the 2 main aspects which man discerns in the universal life, being and becoming. So being and becoming, action and non-action. And number 4, neither caunation nor cognition, action nor thought, as performed by this surface mind, concerned as it is with natural existence and dominated by spiritual conceptions, is able to set up any relations with the absolute or transcendental world. Such action and thought deal wholly with materials supplied directly or indirectly by the world of sense. The testimony of the mystics, however, and of all persons possessing an, quote, instinct from the absolute, end quote, points to the existence of a further faculty in man, an intuitive power which the circumstances of diurnal life tend to keep, quote, below the threshold of his consciousness, and which thus becomes one of the factors of his subliminal life. This latent faculty is the primary agent of mysticism and lives a substantial life in touch with the real or transcendental world. 5, certain processes of which contemplation has been taken as a type so alter the state of consciousness as to permit the emergence of this faculty, which, according as it enters more or less into the conscious life, makes man more or less a mystic. The mystic life, therefore, involves the emergence from deep levels of man's transcendental self, its capture of the field of consciousness, and the conversion or rearrangement of his feeling, thought, and will, his character, about this new center of life. We state then, as the conclusion of this chapter, that the object of the mystic's adventure, seen from within, is the apprehension of or direct communion with that transcendental reality which we tried in the last section to define from without. Think about Jesus says, he who comes to me, to the woman at the well, shall have in them living waters flowing out from deep within them. It's like that, right? Here, as in the fulfillment of the highest earthly love, knowledge and communion are the same thing. We must be, quote, oned with bliss, end quote, if we are to be aware of it. The main agent by which we may attain this communion resides in that part of the self which usually lies below the threshold of our consciousness. Thence, in certain natures of abnormal richness and vitality, and under certain favorable conditions, it may be liberated by various devices such as contemplation. Once it has emerged, however, it takes up, to help in it the work, aspects of the conscious self. The surface must cooperate with the deeps, and at last, merge with those deeps to produce that unification of consciousness upon high levels, which alone can put a term to man's unrest. The heart that longs for the all, the mind that conceives it, the will that concentrates the whole self upon it, must all be called into play. The self must be surrendered, but it must not be annihilated, as some quietists have supposed. There was a sect called Quietists that went off on their own direction, that weren't balanced, but that had some truths within, but they took them to extremes. Anyway, it only dies that it may live again. Yourself must be surrendered, but it must not be annihilated, as some quietists have supposed. It only dies that it may live again. The resurrection, she didn't say that, but supreme success, says the Lady Julian, Julian of Norwich, in a passage which anticipates the classification of modern psychology, the permanent assurance of the mystic that, quote, we are more verily in heaven than in earth, cometh of the natural love of our soul, and of our clear light of the clear light of our reason, and of the steadfast mind. Right? She says it. We are more verily in heaven than in earth. Quote, cometh of the natural love of our soul, and of the clear light of our reason, and of the steadfast mind. And the revelations of divine love, that's in there. That's chapter 4, I think. It's either IV or LV. It might be 55. I don't know. What is the order of, it's worth reading that whole thing anyway. What is the order of precedence which these three activities are to assume in the work, which is one? All, as we have seen, must do their part, for the business is nothing less than the movement of man in his wholeness to high levels. But this question, the ultimate nature of this, high levels, but which shall predominate? On the answer which each gives to this question, the ultimate nature of the self and the nature of that self experience of reality will depend. The question for her is really this: under which aspect of consciousness can she creep most closely to the thought of God? She has that capitalized, quote, thought of God. It's 111144. The real life in which she is bathed, which fostered and made dominant, is most likely to put her in harmony with the absolute. Which fostered and made dominant is most likely to put her in harmony with the absolute. This is the last paragraph. The love of God, which is ever in the hearts and often on the lips of saints, is the passionate desire for this harmony. The, quote, malady of thought, end quote, is its intellectual equivalent. Though we may seem to escape God, we cannot escape this craving, except at the price of utter stagnation. We go back, therefore, to the statement with which this chapter opened, that of the two governing desires which share the prison of the self. We see them now as representing the cravings of the intellect and the emotions for the only end of all quest. The disciplined will, that conative power with all the dormant faculties which it can wake and utilize, can come to the assistance of one of them, which, the question is a crucial one, for the destiny of the self depends on the partner which the will selects. What was that at the beginning? Like, aren't you curious? The beginning of this chapter, the mental apparatus. I didn't write in this book. I underlined stuff in the other book, but I didn't get this far anyway. Where the first cravings, it's overpowered by, this is page 52 of this book, overpowered by the ardor of unsatisfied love, the self's reaction upon things becomes poetic, artistic, and characteristically, explicitly, but not always explicitly religious. We have seen further that a certain number of persons declare that they have escaped from this prison. Anyway, we'll have to go back and read that. Two forces, the desire to know more. Okay, here are the two forces. Shut with her in that cell, two forces, the desire to know more and the desire to love more, are ceaselessly at work. I just want to love more, that's it. And I want to know more. But which one will dominate here? If you want to know and you get stuck in your mind, you actually can know more when you go into your soul, because you know you're connected to the oneness. But you think you're going to know more if you just stay in your head and call all that stuff crazy. All right, much love. Share this with like-minded people so that they have access to all this time that we've put in, or I've put in, or whatever, all of us.